Again, welcome folks who are joining us. This is UERU's opening town hall for the 2025-2026 academic year. And we're delighted you're able to join us today. We have a very important topic to discuss and a great panel to share with you. Well, wonderful. Why don't we go ahead and get started? I'm Stephen Dandino, and I'm privileged to serve as the Executive Director of the Association for Undergraduate Education at Research Universities, UERU. Welcome to our opening town hall for the 2025-26 academic year, titled UERU and the Coalition for Student Wellbeing. And I'm delighted to welcome a great panel on an important topic. We're delighted that you can join us. This event is recorded and will be posted at UERU's website as per usual. As we roll into the town hall, there'll be opportunity to engage the panel, and so I'd ask you to use your raise hand function in order to indicate whether you have a question or not when it comes to the Q&A time. You're welcome to use the chat as well if you have questions or you just want to have some leave comments there. You're very welcome to do so. And I also, before we get started, I want to thank our colleague at the University of Florida, Dr. Angela Lindner, who saw Carson Domey give a talk in South Florida some time ago and alerted us to the importance of this student group. And so we thank Angela for that heads up and for the fact that led to this town hall. I think without further ado, folks are still joining, but we'll let them in as they come. Without further ado, let me turn things over to the event moderator, Dr. Art Markman of the University of Texas at Austin. Thanks, Art.
Thanks so much, Steve. Good morning and afternoon to everybody, depending on what time zone you're in. I'm glad to be able to spend an hour with you, and particularly glad to be able to spend this hour with the wonderful panel that we've got. As we head into the academic year, we all know that we want our students to learn, but students are going to learn best when they are able to bring their full selves to the classroom, and that's going to happen when they are feeling good about themselves, good about life, and of course, there are going to be inevitable struggles for everyone in this academic year, and we need to really do what we can to maintain student well-being. And what's fascinating is while every university has wonderful programs to address student well-being, one of the things that happens is that we often lose the student perspective in this. And so we, as professionals, think we know exactly what it is we're supposed to be doing, and we don't always bring the voice of the student in. I think what's wonderful about this panel is we do have 3 students with us, in addition to Dr. Okolo, who's going to be bringing a real perspective from the professional side. So to get things kicked off, I'd love to have the students introduce themselves first, perhaps in the order that are on my screen. I'll have Carson, then Krisha, and Shriya say a couple of words about themselves, followed by Dr. Okolo, and then we'll kick off some questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Markman. It's great to be here with all of you. My name is Carson Domey, and I serve as the Executive Director of the Coalition for Student Wellbeing. And I'm also about to be a senior at the University of Texas at Austin. So glad to be able to kind of share this hour with you. So appreciative of your interest in student wellbeing and wanting to, take an hour out of your day, either right at the start of the school year or right before the school year. To come and attend this conversation means a lot. And, so grateful to Steve, Dr. Markman, and the UERU team for organizing this, Krisha and Shriya for taking their time right at the beginning of the school year to be a part of this conversation, and for Dr. Okolo's participation. Jed, ever since our founding at the Coalition, has been such a great partner. And, I'm sure as you guys will see throughout the conversation, Dr. Okolo does such a great job of really kind of bridging the gap between a lot of things that, we'll say as students and kind of turning that into either supporting it with research or recommendations for, folks on the higher ed administration end of things. So, super excited for our conversation.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Krisha Basu, and I am an incoming freshman to Stanford University. It's such an honor to be here with all of you. I will say this is my first panel event, and this is such an honor to be able to speak and explain how I feel as an incoming student. So I'm really excited for today, and I'll pass it along to Shriya.
Hi, everyone. I just want to echo what Carson and Krisha said. It's an amazing opportunity to be here, and I want to thank all of you for your commitment to student well-being. It means a lot seeing all these different participants and committed to this common goal of mental health, and it means a lot coming from a student. And as a student, I'm Shriya Garg. I'm currently a member and the advocacy director of the Coalition for Student Wellbeing. Alongside Carson and Krisha, I'm a rising junior at the University of Georgia, double majoring in genetics and economics, and super excited to talk more about these topics.
And good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Zainab Okolo. I'm the Senior Vice President for Policy Advocacy and Government Relations at the JED Foundation. The JED Foundation was established 26 years ago when the Satal family unfortunately lost their son, Jed, to suicide. And this was after he actively sought services on campus. And so, as you could imagine, 26 years ago, the order of the day was stigma. And the conversations like these around centering student experiences and taking them seriously to incorporate them into policy and actionable programs was not exactly the rule of the day. So really a pleasure to be here today to talk not only from the policy perspective, but to have it on the foundation of these very powerful student voices to tell us and help us lead the way of what do students actually need? What are they responding to? And how can we scale resources for them at the time of their most vulnerable experiences on college campuses? So pleasure to be here today.
Thanks, everybody. I'm really excited to kick this off. And I want to start with just a general question to the students. If you had to pick one thing about the student experience as it relates to well-being, and Krisha, in your case, also in thinking about the prospective student experience as you enter university, what is it that you would want people to know about that experience that might help to ground them in thinking about student well-being? Dive in.
Carson, you can go ahead.
Okay. I would say, I think one of the most kind of serendipitous parts of higher education is how vast the range of experiences of students are. Even if you just looked at Krisha, Shriya, and I's backgrounds, right? Like we all grew up in three totally different parts of the country, like all different factors that, there really is no one or even 100 student experiences, right? It's really each individual student has their own experience that informs their perspective, and I think that kind of bolsters the need of why we should try to have systems and institutions try to proactively engage students to the best degree that we can to design these resources and services, because as the average student experience at University of Texas at Austin may be very different than Stanford or Georgia. So I think it's best to really try to ground ourselves as much as we can. I think that starts at the faculty level all the way up to the administrative level as well.
I really appreciate how you mentioned that we're all so different. And I think that really echoes off the fact that the way that we respond to things that happen to us are also very different. A lot of people might respond to feeling low by being outgoing and talking to everybody. And a lot of people might respond to that, to the traditional idea of being depressed and being in one's room. So I think it's really important to realize that everyone responds differently. And at the end of the day, we're still kids. I'm 18, and Carson and Shriya are not that much older than me, and we're still trying to figure out who we are, what we want to do. So I would say that we look up to all of you a lot, and we will depend on you constantly. So yeah, just keeping in mind that we're still kids and trying to figure things out.
I think this kind of reemphasizes the importance of meeting students where they are, kind of bouncing off the idea of each student's experience is different and that we're still learning and we're still developing. I think it's just very important to maintain clear communication and clear connection to the students, whether it's faculty, administration, but even like peers, and relying on everybody in the space, in the school, through organizations, involvements, through everything. I think it's just important to keep talking about these issues and bring them front and center, so that way students know that these are things that we all care about, and these are not things that should be stigmatized or should be kind of repressed below what should be talked about.
That's great. Dr. Okolo, do you want to add anything about what you've seen around student experience?
Absolutely. So first of all, I just want to thank these fabulous students for, again, sharing their lived experience. I cannot emphasize enough how much student experience is more than just anecdote. It is not bespoke. It is shared. And hearing from them and hearing what they're hoping to experience on campus should kind of lend ourselves to this idea that we want our students to be as well as possible entering the workforce. One of the data points that really pushed my work, and giving a little bit of a background, before I entered into policy advocacy around this topic, I've served as a mental health trauma-informed therapist for the last 15 years. And I know what you're thinking. Did you start when you were 2? Well, then yes, I'll go ahead and take that compliment and put it in my back pocket. But over those years, I specifically worked with college-age students dealing with transition. And what they dealt with a lot when looking for resources was this shame, because everything tells them that their experience, particularly in college, should be nothing short of easy breezy and really beautiful. If they're struggling, there are ways to deal with that. And the ways that we have promoted within media has sensationalized a lot of self-medicating behaviors, like um, dabbling in being overly social is the only way I can put it. Risky sexual behaviors, overspending, and we call it, oh, just being part of the college experience. But from a clinical perspective, no, that is not every student's experience. That is a unique experience when students, especially if they can't get out of bed or they're dealing with undiagnosed mental health issues, where the data tells us that during the college age experience, this is where students are finding, sometimes for the first time, that they even have a mental health challenge, especially when they're on campus and away from their creature comforts and their communities of origin. And so these are things that we've worked really hard at JED to, first of all, reintroduce a new moniker and idea of what it means to be a college age student, what Krisha just mentioned, what it means to evolve and come into oneself. It comes with a little bit of challenge and push and pull, which is completely normal. It comes with a little bit of stress as a currently stressed adult, very, very normal. And there are resources when you are feeling a certain piece of imbalance. I think kind of going into how institutions need to look at this, the data that I wanted to mention is from the AUCCCD, which is the American University College Counselors, and I forgot the last C and D, but it is the organizing body for college counselors on campus. And what they mentioned in 2020 was this distinct challenge of just not having enough counselors on campus. And so we found that students that were in crisis we're waiting up to 60 days to receive resources and to be seen on campus. And that's enough sometimes to lose a student, either to leaving campus because they think that they're not ready for what campus has to offer, or the shame of even having to seek out resources and not being served immediately, or in the worst cases, dealing with an attempt and unfortunately completions, which we've seen the data really spike during COVID. And so as we work through this and as we imagine what we want the next couple of years within our systems to look like, centering it around what students are saying that they already need is going to be imperative, and making sure that our needles around the data move in the right direction is also going to be imperative.
Yeah. So thank you, and great way to kick this off. And now I want to dig in a little bit. One of the fascinating things about this panel and the 3 students that we have here is that we are you are students at fairly large universities, which is typical of the kinds of universities that are part of UERU. And that creates a special kind of challenge because, Carson, as you point out, every student has a unique story, and yet it is hard to maintain a focus on that uniqueness when there are 20, 30, 40, even 50,000 students on campus. So I wonder, and maybe we'll start with Shriya this time, react a little bit to how do we think about trying to create smaller communities out of the very large community we have so that we can do a great job of trying to allow everyone to be seen during their college experience.
I think this is a wonderful speaking point, and I'd like to highlight something that the University of Georgia actually does to kind of get around the feeling of such a big campus. So, don't quote me on the number, but I think the UGA has around 40,000 students. So it's very common to feel like when you're walking on campus, you're not seeing any familiar faces. There's a sense that, you're very anonymous. And so I think that the University of Georgia tries to get around that a lot of the times with prospective students. So they have all these what they call summer transition opportunities called dog camp, where students get to come in and they have small group settings where students actually talk about their one-on-one experiences, what they went through in high school and middle school, and you share those stories with one another. And students are asked to kind of keep keep the stories to themselves. It's not something that we're allowed to talk about after the summer experience is over, but it's something that kind of made me feel like each one of these students that I'm getting to know here at Dog Camp has a story and is unique and is someone that is of interest. It's not just everyone here is a huge dog fan and we have nothing else in common. Each of us have our own experiences that we can share, and it kind of changed my perspective for how to approach coming in to school, because I started asking people about what life was like before coming to the University of Georgia, what was common, what was different, and learning from them. So I think that that was a really good way of kind of overcoming how big the university feels by just teaching students um, to ask good questions and to feel okay, vulnerable, and to share their own experiences. So I think that was a really amazing opportunity I got to participate in.
Yeah, I think one of the things that the University of Texas does best is making such a large campus feel like a community. Not saying it feels small, but I'm saying it feels like a community, which I think is, an important distinction. We were talking about this a little bit during our prep call of how much have found benefit in the first year interest group requirement that UT has, which is basically, any incoming student is required to be a part of mainly academic centered group for your first year. Most of the, I would say, intensive piece of it is your fall semester where you're taking, a 1 hour class, kind of getting acquainted with the university's resources, college life. But arguably, I think the most beneficial part of it is the built-in peer mentorship aspect that all of these programs have. There's many different ones. If you could be in, your college's honors program, you could be in a program like Shriya, like a Foundation Scholars or 40 Acre Scholars program. So they all look very different, but at their core, they still serve that same mission, and that's to get first year students acquainted on campus and get them in a community. And I like to think of it honestly as like a bridge community. I think for a lot of people, with the exception of some of the like kind of very intensive 4 year scholarship programs like the 40 Acre Scholars here at UT, I would say that it's not the community that you'll necessarily stay with for all 4 years, but it's the community that'll get you from your first day on campus into an extracurricular org, or some affiliation within your own college, even further. And so I think it's just a wonderful way to help people get their feet set on the ground, and get to know, what's a pretty big environment, as UT is and as many of the UERU schools are.
Krisha, what do you think is gonna help you to make things a little bit smaller as you move into Stanford?
Yeah, so I will say that Stanford has already done a really great job of including different groups. We have something called the Summer Bridge, which is going on right now. So a lot of the people who I've connected with online are at Stanford and showing me videos of the dorm and the dining hall and things. So just that primary, that summer bridge, like how Shriya and Carson mentioned just before heading into the year. There's also a program for first generation students, so they're able to connect with each other, find a sense of belonging. And similarly, when I was at Admit Weekend, there was the club fair, and it was overwhelming but so exciting because everybody was wanting to talk to me, and I've had like 1,000 pamphlets, I could say. But these people have still connected with me online and they keep sending information. So Stanford has done a really good job of making me feel like I have communities to go into. But I will definitely say, in terms of mental health and mental well-being, um, I would like to see that each organization, if it be, for example, Asian American Ethnic Center, or academic community, like Carson said, I'd like to see that each of these communities have some resource allocated to mental health resources, just so that I know that everybody, wherever they belong, have somewhere to go to that connects to who they are as a person and to what they need specifically.
Dr. Okolo, have you seen any other programs that you want to highlight?
Yes, so not to be a shameless plugger, but here I am plugging away. So what some of the work that we do at the JED campus includes implementing our comprehensive approach across campuses. So the examples that were given were fabulous, but they're not as effective if campus administrators also don't have kind of a roadmap of how to deal with crisis on campus, what means reduction actually means on college campuses, what resources need to be had to really meet the need, as we just heard, is necessary for students to be fully oriented and know where their tribe is and figure out how to fit, but also how to triage and when to triage off campus. And that's a lot of the work that JED does with our comprehensive approach. We've currently now operated in over 600 institutions across 40 some odd states. So we're really proud about that. And the one thing that we do in terms of ensuring that institutions understand where the real girth of this work is programmatically is we make sure that we engage student voice. We make sure that we create opportunities for students to give feedback to their administrators. And we also measure them at the beginning, at the end of our 4-year training program, where we take in the data to say, here's where you're starting from, here's what the implementation looks like, and here's where your campus readiness is around mental health crisis. So those are just some of the ways that I could think of making sure that there's always a system approach to this work, and that we don't leave it in just the hands of students to put together student groups to address these needs.
Thanks. Yeah, and one of the things that I know we've been trying to do most recently at the University of Texas is to recognize that we put a huge amount of effort into that first year experience, but actually the second year experience matters a tremendous amount as well. Second year is often a time where students are shifting from getting used to being in college to taking on the identity of being a particular major, of thinking of themselves as a scholar or on the road towards a particular career.
Absolutely.
And that comes with a lot of difficulties as well. And I think that we can't just assume that getting a student successfully through their first year has somehow taken care of all the problems. And so I think it's, to Dr. Okolo's point, it is important to be thinking holistically about the entire student experience and not just assume that if once you've had a successful orientation or a good semester, then after that we don't need to worry about you, and we can focus on the next group of students.
That's right. Can I add to that a little bit, Dr.
Please, yes.
So what you've just described is a phenomenon known as summer melt. So students will leave for that first summer, anxiety will hit. Even if they do their best their first year, they will get home, get back into their usual or their previously held routines and get comfortable and be worried about coming back. And so what we learned about summer melt even before the pandemic was that mental health, behavioral health resources, and sense of belonging was the largest indicator for whether or not students came back. Not financing, not whether or not they got the dorm and the roommate that they wanted. It was whether or not they felt a certain level of behavioral stability and safety on campus. And we've lost so many very talented students to simply not just going, hey, that is a normative feeling, your first anxious year, come on back and have that experience. And what Dr. Art just described was there is a really big difference between recruitment, enrollment, persistence, that bridge of persistence. And this is where we leave students to kind of hang out and, survival of the fittest, figure it out yourself. And that programming of saying, this is how you actually transition, especially going into sophomore year. A lot of our institutions have policies. You hit a certain credit hour and you better pick your major and you better know what you want to do for the next 20 years. No pressure though, but pick it soon, So some of that is a real opportunity to have these larger conversations and also usher in where faculty can come in. Some of my work, I've had the honor of working directly with faculty that have said, not only do I want to know how to best support students, how I can be a warm hand to students, but how do I evaluate? How do I know when a student is struggling? All of my students come to me with things around around their assignments, but how do I know when a student in my classroom is actually struggling? And that's another piece of ensuring that the bulk of this resource work is not just relegated to our counseling centers, that is integrated into the fabric, the community, and the culture of our campuses.
Thanks.
Could I bounce off of that a little bit?
Please do.
So, I mean, I am a rising junior, but I've just kind of gone through that sophomore year, and I'd like to speak a little bit more about my experience. So, us sophomores like to call it the sophomore slump, which usually refers to the academics involved in sophomore year. But I will say that there's a lot of different facets that kind of go into that slump of sophomore year. First of all, it's the first time that a lot of students move off campus. And so that is a very big kind of deterrent to coming back to school because you realize that a lot of your social support are not the people who are your neighbors anymore. You can't just go knock on someone's door and go to the dining hall anymore. You have to organize and learn how to be very intentional with your relationships. And that's something that is a skill that comes with time. It's not an immediate, once you come back to school in August, you're immediately great at scheduling hangouts. And so that's something that I had to learn and I had to deal with. And it's not something that comes very natural. So that's something that I was very worried about. And the second thing I wanted to mention is just that sophomore year, like many have been saying, is a time of career growth and career development. And it's also the time where academics kind of hit you the hardest. So as a pre-med student, I took organic chemistry and biochemistry. Those are not classes that I can take without a social support group, or I can't take with just being on myself. It kind of took me, my whole family, and my friend group to get me through those classes. And so I think it's just very important to, once again, talk to faculty about their role, especially if they know that they're dealing with a lot of upperclassmen or sophomore year students, that they have an increased responsibility to kind of be talking students through what their class means and how they can be of service. And I also think that faculty are doing a good job. So my organic chemistry professor would send us long messages about the importance of mental health right before he released our grades. And so, there was definitely an attempt to make sure that students know that they're being cared for and that they belong at the university, but just more efforts in that regard are always necessary.
Well, go ahead, Carson.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, adding on to that too, it's funny kind of hearing what Dr. Okolo was saying about like the summer melt, which I'd actually never heard that term before, and kind of hearing what Shriya was saying. Like I looking back on like the start of my sophomore year, I actually had a very kind of similar experience where like academically and socially, where I mean, for context, I grew up in Massachusetts. I went down to UT. I didn't even consider really going to the school. My best friend made me apply to the school on the condition that he wasn't editing my college applications unless I applied. So thank you, Ryan. But yeah, I mean, I had gone down there really not knowing anyone in the state or at the school. And so I got like really comfortable, like diving in, of course, because you kind of have to be, and expected that my freshman year. But what I realized my sophomore year is like I think I had gotten comfortable like towards the end of freshman year. And so when sophomore year started, I was like, you know what? Like it's too big of a campus to like have your community maybe feel like too small. And so I started like trying out different organizations that like weren't related to my major, which was super beneficial and are the ones that I'm still involved in today. And on the academics front, I was originally majoring in both government and economics. And, shortly after starting Calc 1, realized, one major and two minors, dropping econ down to a minor and getting to do like business public policy, which is a really awesome program at UT. Wish that was a major. And really just kind of found myself exploring in more different ways and kind of adjusting my degree to allow me to kind of have that opportunity to explore the subjects that I really wanted to go into deeper.
Great. So just to shift things a little bit, I'm curious if you could, we'll start again with the students. Talk a little bit about both where you find that students tend to get help and support for, when dealing both with just generic well-being as well as with potential crisis, and what barriers do you notice in students' access to the resources they might need?
If you don't mind, I'll start this one off. And I'll speak from my personal experience. So, for the past 4 years in high school, I served on something called the Hope Squad. And this is a national suicide prevention organization. And I had the opportunity to represent the state of California nationally for the past 2 years. And what I've seen is that when we train our peers on suicide prevention, there is a significant increase in communication with each other. So when I feel low or I feel like something's going on and I need to talk to my friends, and I'll say it's my friends who I talk to, it's important for me to know that my friends have the resources and understanding that if what I'm saying to them is alarming, then they will do something about it. And so, like, as you were saying, who do we go to? We go to our friends, but the biggest barrier is going from friends to convincing whoever we're talking to come and get help. And so I would definitely say that there's a stigma still around talking to each other and not spreading rumors about each other. And then going to an adult and being seen at the counseling office or being seen crying or feeling sad. That's one of the biggest barriers that I personally saw in high school and which made it hard for me to help other people get help. So I will definitely say, so friends, we go to friends, and then the biggest barrier is that stigma and not going from friends to trusted adults.
I would agree with Krisha. I think that whenever anything happens, I always go to my friends. It's just who you trust the most. And I think also there's some kind of reason we go to the friends is just because we don't want to make it seem so inflated. I feel like whenever people recommend for you to go to a school administrator or to go to the school on campus networks, we automatically want to kind of say like, oh, no, it's not that big of an issue. It's not that big of an issue. Versus if we talk to our friends, we're just having a conversation. There's very low stakes. And so I think that that's something that we need to kind of talk about more is just how to convince students that it's not when you're going to your on-campus resources, it's not inflating the issue or it's not making the issue much bigger than what it seems. It's just same, having a conversation one-on-one. You're just talking to someone who has way more clinical expertise than maybe your friends do. So I think that that's something that I've experienced on a personal level and just seeing with my friends that there's still a stigma to going to on-campus resources that I think is very prevalent.
I think probably the biggest barrier that I see is knowing, which door or which resource is the right resource. I think at, a lot of big schools like UT and, probably similar with UGA and Stanford, we're in a really fortunate spot to have a lot of resources, right? Which, not saying, obviously we don't take it for granted, right? That's, something that's nice about being in such a big school. But I would say one of the challenges that I think, folks that I talk with grapple with is, we have Timely Care, right, which is a telehealth platform 24/7. available for UT students. And some people, wonder, like, is timely care going to be the same as getting an in-person appointment? Some know the difference and some prefer timely care, right? It could be better for their schedule. You're not seeing a clinician from the school, which, some people like having that option, especially, student athletes, I've actually heard, although they have their own folks too. So there's a lot of different things. UT also operates a UT system-wide hotline, crisis hotline, and there's also 988, the national, suicide lifeline, and there's also crisis text line, which is the national text line, right? So there's a lot of different ways to go seek some sort of help. But I think the question is what kind of resource offers, kind of the true scope of services. And I do actually like to think that it's something that UT has done an increasingly better job at addressing. The head of health and wellness at UT always does a great job at the start of, every semester of, most importantly to college students, succinctly, kind of listing out, what resources are available, where to access them, how to access them. And I think the other thing too that UT has done particularly well is looking at, mental health as overall well-being. The way that our campus is structured is that, the head of health and well-being also oversees programs like recreational sports. And makes a good effort to highlight those services for students to be able to go engage. I think it's a super important part of the transition to college, and it's another way to help find community too. So but kind of in summary, I'd say, in my opinion, the biggest barrier is probably knowing which resource is the right resource.
Dr. Okolo, any other barriers you'd like to highlight?
Yeah, I think our brilliant students have really covered the barriers pretty well, from making sure that we earn the trust of our student population so that they know when it is completely fine to go with their peers and when they know that they must come to a professional, to addressing some of the stigma that was also highlighted. And then to Carson's last point around knowing what type of practitioner to go to for what. The example I like to use that kind of encapsulates all of these experiences is as a person that if I discover, and this is a real life story, so bear with me, friends, we're close now, a mosquito bite on my arm that hangs out too long, and I'm up at 1 a.m. Googling symptoms of prolonged bites. And then I make the doctor's appointment from my phone, and my doctor has to kind of squint and, head tilt and hand me some peroxide or tell me to drink, I don't know, apple cider vinegar or something more holistic, and sends me on my way. At no point, whether I was 2 a.m. Googling the symptoms, from making the actual appointment with all the fear and fury in my voice around what I knew was a mosquito bite, did I feel any shame. And I just burdened the entire medical system from actually servicing people that actually need help. My hope is that we get to the point where our system is, number one, able to service folks in those kind of quick ways. So as we mentioned, timely care, other platforms like UWell that offer that 24-hour care service, they're servicing two functions, in my opinion: helping to actually address the needs of students, but also helping to shift culture around how we openly talk about mental health and when folks are actually comfortable reaching out for services. And then also equipping our systems to engage students in such a way that they understand that mental health is health. And so it is very legitimate for students to go amongst their peers and create communities around lived experience, because that makes for a healthy community. And each generation has a mark of experience that isn't shared with the older professionals that would help them with clinical diagnoses. I think some of the conversations that we've had, going back to my earlier point around making sure that faculty are supported, we've used evidence-based gatekeeper training for faculty and staff, for example, for them to be able to quickly assess. But some of the first pieces of that assessment is getting faculty to understand how to communicate to students that their shared experience or their stressful experience is actually pretty normative. This allows them to know when they actually do need help. Because some of the pushback for mental health resources, especially after COVID, when coming to systems, was How much of this is actually the responsibility of a college? Do we have the resources to meet the need of the day? And I would gander to say no if we think that the only resource that we have is counseling services on campus. No, this is a holistic approach. We're talking about culture, we're talking about cultural shifts and changes, and we're talking about introducing a new way of thinking about our holistic wellness to include mental health. So it's really exciting to kind of hear that we're still focusing on developing those peer connections, but the system has a lot more work to do to catch us up on how we assess for what we really need in the moment.
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate this conversation. And, I think what's fascinating is the stigmas associated with mental health and well-being extend far, far earlier than just a stigma around seeking treatment and help. I think, for example, societally, we have a real shame around sadness. People feel very free to express anxiety and fear, but not sadness. We don't, we get uncomfortable when somebody's just feeling sad. We try to tell them everything's going to be okay and get them to stop feeling sad, as opposed to allowing them to express that in peer groups or in other places. And I think that when we push people away from sadness, we make it harder for people to express how they're doing in ways that also includes people who may not be at that time in mental health crisis, but we are generally making it harder for people to make community around their mental health. And I think we have to accept sadness. When you've got somebody who's crying, look them in the eye. If you see somebody crying in a group, you'll often find people are looking away, not making eye contact. Look them in the eye, be compassionate, recognize that they are expressing something that's deeply felt, and I think allowing those expressions is incredibly valuable for helping people to feel like they can express themselves in that community. So I think there's a lot we can do. Dr. Okolo, as we start to get towards the end of this panel and we'll be opening it up for questions fairly soon, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about ways that universities might use data and studies to inform the kinds of programs that we offer.
Absolutely. So before even jumping to that, I want to just underscore the important point that you just made, Dr. Markman, around having the historical reference for why we are the way we are right now. Where does stigma come from? Why are we so nervous to look at people when they're sad? We treat it like we're going to catch a cold. If I look at you too long, I too will be sad. And there's actually data to actually defend that, because if you're walking around completely emotionally zombied, having somebody else express their emotions around you is the very tipping point that you will avoid like the plague, right? And some of that is not our fault. It's essentially how our society crafted itself when we were going through industrial era. We went through a phase of hospitalizing folks, which in the early 1900s, who would, by all intensive purposes and means, in this day and age, be diagnosed with something as simple as anxiety or depression. We were experimenting with lobotomy. So there was a lot of fear associated with even saying that you needed any sort of help. And this is really unique for our Western culture, because in Eastern cultures and other parts of the world, folks with some of these diagnoses are considered some of the more talented, artistic, gifted folks within their cultural experience. And so we're in a phase right now where we are in our earlier discussions on how we appropriately incorporate different and lived experiences while still being able to differentiate between those like special abilities and when folks are actually struggling. What I'm finding institutions that are doing this successfully, they're doing two things very well. They are, again, taking a systems approach. And so at JED, we've worked with a couple of different institutions, as I've mentioned, but we've also had the honor of working with state level systems, because a lot of this change is top down. We need not only our college presidents talking about this work, We need our state legislators, our governors or senators nodding their heads and saying, yes, this is an appropriation, a resource appropriation that we're making for these institutions to make the adjustments. And we had that for 2-3 straight years where we had governors investing everywhere from $5 million to $5 billion of investments towards education across K-20, addressing just mental health. And we saw that manifest with institutions really taking on expanding their counseling service, bringing in a mental health first aid toolkits for their staff and faculty, and students really growing their student services groups as main hubs and resources for students. I think the other piece that we have to continue to fly the flag on, and institutions are also doing well on, is kind of catching up with the times. So we are serving right now a new generation, and Gen Z, when surveyed, has already made it clear that when they're thinking about colleges, behavioral health and mental wellness could be the make or break of whether or not they enroll in your institution. So again, these are students that have the means, have the resources, are more than able, but they want to feel safe. And so thinking about taking on programs that would allow the campus to provide that safety, that those resources is really important. Of course, JED Foundation is great, but I really, really also want to uplift and underscore those platforms like UWill, like Timely, that also supplement some of that in-person care so that students always have a warm hand to turn to, even if they don't have somebody directly in front of them.
Do want to give some of our folks who are watching this discussion a chance to ask some questions. So if anybody has a question, that now would be a great time to either drop that in the chat or raise your hand. Give everybody a moment to think about what they might want to ask. Don't be afraid, right? This is a safe space for we gotta model what we're hoping for here.
I was going to say, do students get to cold call administrators here? No.
That you know, absolutely. You can, if you've got somebody out there that you want to call out, I wouldn't stop you. Well, in the meantime, as we're waiting for a question, oh, let's see, there we go. So we do have a question that just got dropped in the chat. So we'll open this up to everybody. But where or do you see digital technologies or interventions playing a role in helping students? So open that up to the group.
I'm happy to kick us off since I feel like I might have massage that question out from my last comment. So I do want to make the differentiation between digital technologies and kind of access portals like Timely and UWill being different from some of the newer platforms, particularly the AI chatbots that students sometimes often talk to like this and ask very personal questions from, am I okay, to do I break up with him next week, to why didn't he text me, to my parents' divorce, what do I do? Starting from the latter, some of those technologies, all of those technologies are very new, and they have not been progressed in their development to stop themselves from essentially giving information to students from this shared knowledge that it pulls from the billions and billion points of data that it uses to sound so human. And so I have a lot of pause there. We've done a lot of advocacy work around AI in making sure that there are barriers to how seriously they are taken when giving advice to folks that are particularly in crisis. We've also unfortunately seen across the nation and across the world a couple of suicide attempts and completions related to chatbots. And so I'm in no means suggesting that those are reliable resources. And I am in fact warning that we ensure that we keep these kinds of conversations going so that our students, particularly this generation that tends to have more trust with technology, does not rely on those resources exclusively to get the help that they need. When thinking about platforms like UWill, the JED Foundation and other platforms, these are connected to licensed clinicians that could actually resource you and get you triaged onto in-person services and care. Even the 988 text portals you're texting back and forth with trained practitioners that can give you that human touch and can then assess if the conversation needs to involve a higher level of support or more clinical care. And the reason why I think these interventions are important in playing a role is because the demand has tripled since before COVID. And so a lot of this is making space for us as our workforce catches up with the need. So I forgot the data source, but it takes about 4 years to receive a degree in psychology or marriage and family therapy or social work, another 2 to receive your clinical hours, another 2 to specialize. You're almost going through a couple years shy of a med school degree. My parents remind me all the time. And you find yourself, when we're looking at the workforce, we just like the math doesn't really work out for us to wait for the workforce to meet the demand. And so this is where I think the technologies have become very helpful, particularly helping students in crisis and figuring out a way to both scale that, both in terms of resource dissemination and consistent funding, is the conversations that we're having at the state level right now.
I see another question here that I'd love to get perhaps the student perspective on, which is so Michael Bradford wrote in the chat asking, can we talk a little bit more about strategies that might make peer mentorship effective or not effective? And I'd love to hear from all of you on this, but let's start with the students.
Yeah, I would say I feel like what made my experience kind of in the first year interest group so beneficial is that, about half of the program was driven of like peer-to-peer mentorship. Like we had a small group, with a facilitator who was a junior, and then I had 2 other students in the group. So, 4 of us total, a leader and 3 students. And that was, about half of the allotted kind of weekly class time. It met outside of the designated like 1 hour class. And so I think really being intentional about that time allowed, the relationships to develop. I mean, 3 years later, I still keep in touch with my facilitator, which is kind of funny. We don't talk a ton, but definitely, still friendly and, still connected with the students as well. So I think it's one of those things and, honestly, very different interests, very different walks of life. So I think it kind of speaks to the program in the sense of, allowing that time for true kind of relationships to develop. I mean, it's hard to expect, peer mentoring to just kind of expect people to open up after 1 or 2 15-20 minute times with each other. Kind of addressing your part of the question around structures that are not helpful. I think that there is a cautious balance that needs to be had on some of the education, because some of it is pretty elementary. I'm not saying let's not do it, right? But I think kind of being intentional with that, call it the 1 hour a week of like structured class time that we had for 15 weeks, talking about university resources. That's a lot of time. There's definitely probably a couple things in there. There's maybe 2 or 3 lessons that could have been you know made a little bit more concise. So I think just kind of being mindful of not losing people in that kind of portion of peer mentorship.
I think that one program that the University of Georgia does really well is situated within the honors program, and it's called Honors 1000H. And so the program is designed to kind of acclimate students to all the different resources that the people in the college get to offer. But I will say it is taught by honors HTAs, or teaching assistants, that are all students our age, 1 or 2 years older than us. And so it can be very nice to see the full transition that they've done in 1 or 2 years, as a prospective student, because it feels much more low barrier when you see that in 2 years these students have made such growth in the college experience. It makes it feel that you can do it too, and so I think that it's really important to kind of have those times. But I will like to kind of bounce off what Carson said about the fact that sometimes these classes can feel a little bit repetitive and honestly can kind of degrade the response that they want to have in the first place, when every week you're having these sessions, and if the mentor is not really involved, or if the mentor is not kind of really excited about teaching the class or about being there for the students kind of feel like it's a waste of time, and the class was kind of unnecessary altogether. And I was grateful to not have that experience, but I think that it's kind of a class where it's important to have it, but the response can be negative if not properly implemented.
Well, I see we're getting towards the top of the hour here, and I want to be respectful of the time of our audience. So I'm just going to take a moment to thank our wonderful panelists, Carson, Shriya, Krisha. Thank you for sharing your student experience. I think it's just incredibly valuable for all of us who are at universities and in administration to make sure that we are centering the student voice and student experience. And Dr. Okolo, thank you for all the work that you do to promote student well-being. I appreciate you spending an hour with this community to really make sure that we are aware of some of the wonderful things that we could be doing as we continue to improve the student experience. And I want to thank UERU for hosting this platform and making sure that student well-being was put front and center in our discussions as we enter into another school year. And I will turn this back over to Steve.
Thanks, Art, and appreciate you hosting this great town hall. What a terrific discussion. So impressed by our student panelists, particularly. We thank you all for joining. Remind you that this town hall has been recorded and will be posted at ueru.org after, once we get it, in good shape with, proper captioning and the like, and then we'll make sure everyone in our network hears about it, but feel free to share it with anyone that you know who might benefit from having access to it. So we'll bring our first town hall of the 25-26 academic year to conclusion, again with great thanks to all of you who've joined and to our terrific panel. Best wishes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you.